And welcome back to The Full View. We now cross back over to Nasrec, where my colleague Nomfundo Mabelane is in conversation alongside the Nasrec conversations of the EFF's elective conference, with voting, or at least nominations, expected to start a little bit later this evening at around 7 p.m. Nomfundo, what do you have for us?
Good evening, Oliver. Well, it's just gone 6:30. A very good evening to our Full View viewers. We're coming to you live from the Nasrec Expo Center, and this is, of course, the continuation of our special coverage of the EFF's third National People's Assembly. Currently, I'm joined by senior political reporter Busi Chimombe, just to unpack where exactly we are now in the program. Very much delayed, Busi. Thank you very much for joining us. Very much delayed. We understand that the Treasurer General has delivered her report, and now they've gone into discussions. Let's just talk about from here on out what happens.
Okay, just before the Treasurer General presented her report, we had the organizational report. We were hoping, and in terms of the program, it seemed as if half the day just before lunch would take care of both those reports together with the discussions by the delegates and the adoption of these reports. The fact that it's taking so long, Mfundo, gives an idea of exactly how important the whole issue of rebuilding the party is taking at this particular conference. The organizational redesign report is very important because with the electoral decline that has been suffered in the 2024 elections, this is what they are trying to do at this particular conference, to kind of reconsolidate, reset, and try and take themselves to 2026, the local government elections, in a better way.
As per the theme of defend, rebuild and advance, I suppose we are getting that the tone or the atmosphere here is more of rebuilding. So almost to reconfigure. It's not necessarily the elective conference that we have become so used to, whether it be the African National Congress, where there'd be a lot of notes of a list, or even divisive songs that we would hear of people stating who they are going with. It seems here very little is spoken of the top six. If anything, it's on social media, where many would be preoccupied with who will emerge. But here it really is about rebuilding the organization, so it seems.
Definitely, Mfundo. I mean, you know, we've been interacting with a lot of the delegates in the time that we've been here, and there's very little in terms of names being bandied around. You know, one gets the impression that there will be a very stable move from, you know, this outgoing to the next leadership, and that there will be very few changes. Of course, we can expect that for the deputy president position, we will have people, because there is Floyd Shivambu is no longer in that position. But we can expect, and from what it is that we are hearing, we can expect that there isn't going to be a lot of jostling and jockeying for positions. And I think it's because there is an understanding on the part of the delegates that what is important really is not what you know, the contestation, but what is it that we're going to put in place as a foundation to take us forward.
But commentators would beg to differ and say that perhaps it's not reflective of delegates who are really just preoccupied with just the rebuilding or the policies of the organization, but perhaps there's an authoritarian leader. And you have that aspect where perhaps it could be a predetermined outcome. At least this is what some commentators say, that let's not be too naive to assume that there's just that level of preoccupation with policy, that maybe there could have been a predetermined outcome. And the only thing here is just to follow through with maybe what has been discussed. Your views on that?
That could be the case, Mfundo, but you know, the one thing that differentiates a lot of the delegates who are at this particular conference, and I'm not just talking about this particular one of the EFF, but EFF conferences generally, is that you find that many of the delegates actually understand what is at stake. When you talk to them about the different policies, and you say to them, so for instance, in terms of agrarian reform, in terms of land redistribution, in terms of health, the NHI, in terms of the Bila bill, with a lot of delegates at some of these conferences, they're brought here as voting fodder. You just get the impression that they are told by their regional person or their province, this is what it is that you put your hand up for at this particular point in time. These are delegates who seem to understand exactly what is at stake in terms of the various issues and the challenges facing the country. So, you know, I think the whole idea that the EFF has had in terms of trying to position itself as a thought leader in society. You know, you've heard in terms of their organizational redesign, how they're saying that the central command task team people should have some kind of post-matric qualification. You can see it even at a branch level, where you can see that people actually are kind of tackling and battling with some of the issues and you know, some of the nuances.
It's reflective even in their political report, because you can see that great time went to preparing the report. Even the discussion documents, the one you mentioned specifically, document number 2 on land and agrarian reform, they go at length to take them back to the 11 years, the many attempts at trying to effect their manifesto's position on land expropriation without compensation, the cardinal pillar number 1. They speak of the journey they've traversed, where they are now, and what needs to be done at this moment. That if it has failed, they've seen that even the methods that government has used insofar as the land restitution program, they've also to a certain extent failed. So they go at length to speak on these. So most certainly it does seem that indeed probably policies are a priority. But nevertheless, there is an elective conference here, and many now want to know, specifically with the deputy, have you heard from some of the delegates perhaps touching on the name of Godrich Kadi, that perhaps he could be coming in to become the deputy, or are there any other names being bandied about?
Well, we have heard a couple of names, you know, although people are quite tight-lipped on the issue at this point in time. There's been the name of Vuyani Pambo. You'll remember him. Right. He was part of the Fees Must Fall.
Yes. And former spokesperson as well.
Yes, and the head of the presidency.
And the CCT.
Yes, and they've been talking about him as, you know, maybe one of the people who might be able to ascend. There's been talk also about the first female deputy president in the form of Victoria Mente, who happens to be the chairperson at this particular point in time. And all of these are things that, you know, are kind of happening in the corners. It's not something that is, as you mentioned, not being shouted out loud and etc., as you see as some of these other conferences. So we are going to have to see, especially since, you know, with a lot of the nominations at this particular conference, these come from the floor. So it is only at the point at which we go into the plenary session that we will find out who is being nominated for what.
And then on some of the aspects around organization and character redesign, we've been talking about the fact that there's a possibility of doing away with regions, introducing sub-regions, which could see a great number of the people that are now occupying the positions in that tier of the region, which is the RCT, probably losing their regional positions. What is the sentiment on the ground, just when you interact with the delegates on this aspect?
I think there is a move towards a constitutional amendment of that nature. Yeah. Basically, it's about delegates feeling that there needs to be more accountability in terms of their representatives. If you establish those sub-regional level, you're basically taking the organization and you're bringing it closer to the people. There has been a complaint that there is a disconnect that is starting to happen, and we see this all the time, and particularly with other parties, other bigger parties, a disconnect that starts to happen between the followers, the people, and their leaders. Yeah. And this is one of the things that the EFF is trying to, they're talking about, it's a defect in the organizational design, and they say this is copied from the ANC itself, trying to basically preempt a situation where they themselves find a situation where people don't actually know who are their leaders and what people can do for them, and particularly with the elections of 2026 coming, the local government elections, it's very, very important to take government and take it to the people. So I think that is what that particular amendment is about.
Seems as though this specific one might be voted on and everybody agreeing that perhaps they should do away with the regions, preempting those 2026 local government elections. Busi, thank you very much for joining us. Unfortunately, that's where we have to leave it. That is my colleague, senior political reporter Busi Chimombe, speaking to us. It's back to you in studio. In fact, Pardon me, it's not back in studio. This is where I wrap up, and my colleague Samkele Maseko will continue from here on out, because there's still quite a lot to get through in the program. As stated a bit earlier on, they're now in discussions and adoption of reports. There's still going to be an opportunity for the delegates to break for lunch. Lunch will possibly be taking place. It will be now dinner. It's 20 to 7, so soon enough they'll be breaking away, and then straight after that it becomes the open session that my colleague Samkele Maseko will be covering. From me and the team, it's good night.